Hey, this is Connor from Biker's Edge. Today we're talking about the brand spanking new Ibis Ripley AF. If you know anything about Ibis, you know they AF'd the Ripmo last year. They made it a degree slacker, they made it aluminum, and pretty inexpensive. So now Ibis has AF'd the Ripley. Same thing, a degree slacker made out of aluminum, builds start at 3,000 bucks. So has Ibis cracked the code for what a short travel trail bike should be? I don't know, stick around and find out. Let's jump into what the Ripley AF is. It's got 130 millimeters up front, 120 millimeters of rear travel, 65.5 degree head tube angle. It's made out of aluminum, rolls on 29-inch wheels. It is the Ripley that we all know and love, made just a tiny bit slacker and made out of aluminum. And like I said, builds start at 3,000 bucks. All right, cruising through the geometry here really quick. The head tube angle is 65.5 degrees, seat tube angle 76 degrees, and in the size extra large that I rode, the reach is 500 millimeters, which, you know, I'm 6'2", that fit me perfectly. Wheelbase 1,246 millimeters, so kind of in the middle somewhere, not ultra long, not ultra short. Chainstay is 432 millimeters, again, kind of in the middle somewhere, not ultra short, not ultra long. Ibis is releasing this bike in a Dior kit for 3,000 bucks or an NXGX combo for $32.99. NXGX combo is really cool because it uses the GX cassette, derailleur, things that where it matters, they've upgraded you to the GX rather than the opposite, which most bikes see as GX shifter, derailleur, but then NX cassette. GX cassette's really nice. You can use an XD driver, makes upgrading down the road way easier. I didn't love the dropper post on this bike, and it's the same across both builds. It's that KS. The lever was really hard to push. You almost had to unweight the saddle to push the lever to drop it. Didn't love that. You know, if I bought one of these, I would probably be upgrading that dropper post. All right, that's enough of the nitty gritty. Let's jump into ride impressions right now. All right, out here in St. George, Utah again. I am on the brand spanking new Ripley AF. Very excited about this bike. This bike climbs pretty well. It's not quite as energetic and exciting as the carbon Ripley. It's quite a bit heavier. Builds are kind of in that 31 pound range. The suspension design is what makes this bike so incredible. It's very efficient, but it still smooths out bumps really well. So it kind of feels like a more active rear end without the inefficiency. Yeah, I mean, there's some magic sauce going on there. As far as efficiency and climbing speed goes, probably put this bike at about, I don't know, 85-90% of what the carbon version does. It's still fast, still efficient. One of my favorite things about this bike is you give it the gas and it goes. The body position on this bike feels just like the carbon Ripley. You know, the reach is the same, seat tube angle is the same, head tube angle is slacker, so that front wheel gets a little further out in front of you. It also makes that wheelbase longer. So I imagine in the technical stuff, this one's going to be a little trickier to navigate, but you know, it's probably splitting hairs really. All right, we're about to get into some technical climbing here. See how well this bike handles it. Oh! It gets so like vertical right there. That was not a fault of the bike. That was a fault of my weak legs. Just ran out of power. It actually navigated that lower section really well. I can picture everyone asking how this compares to the carbon Ripley. And at least in climbing,
I'd say it's, you know, where the regular Ripley gets an A. I'd probably put this like A minus. You really don't suffer too much of a penalty for going with the aluminum frame. Wheelbase gets just a little bit longer, head tube's a little slacker, and yeah, it gets heavier. But the important parts like the body position and the suspension platform, those are the same. I think this gets an A minus. It's not far off at all. I would not be sad if this was my daily driver for climbing. It does a very good job. Here goes. Woo! All right, starting out the downhill here. The Ripley AF. I'm not gonna lie, I really like how the aluminum frame feels, especially in all this kind of chattery rock. It just has a way of calming things down just a little bit. Just feels a little calmer, quieter. So right off the bat, this feels quite a bit more capable on the downhill than the carbon version. It might be, you know, a combo of aluminum frame, slacker head tube, and subsequent longer wheelbase. Just feels a bit more planted. All right, so that section back there was really, really good. For a 120 mil travel bike, this thing's pretty planted, smooth, quiet. At speed, this feels quite a bit more stable than the regular Ripley. It feels really nice. Still has that really lively, exciting, energetic trail bike feel. Not having issues with the suspension blowing through all the travel too easily. Back end got a little loose in that stuff, but I'm able to push the pace here. So the suspension here feels pretty plush and soft off the top, like most Ibises feel. I don't know why, but I feel like I'm blowing through travel not as easy on this compared to the regular Ripley. I feel like there's plenty of progression here. I'm impressed by this thing. I made it through that really well. I recently reviewed the carbon version of this versus the Tallboy and the transition spur, and I think this aluminum version, if it were in that test, be right up there with the Tallboy on descending performance. It's funny what a degree of head tube angle will do for a bike. All right, real chunky little section here. So overall descending grade on this bike, you know, for the category, I'm gonna give it an A minus. I'm pretty pleased with it. I think, you know, the slacker head tube combined with the aluminum frame, it just rides super well downhill. Oh boy, nice riding there. Got some high-speed straights here. It should be fun.
So I was lucky enough to spend most of a month on this bike before it came out. I've ridden it here locally on flow trails. I've ridden it in St. George on chunky desert, awkward single track. I've ridden it on Gooseberry Mesa. Spent quite a bit of time on this bike. And after all of that riding, I have very few complaints. And, you know, I normally have a complaint or two. But let's jump into the ride quality and kind of break that down and see who's going to get the most out of this bike. So uphill on this bike, it's what you'd expect. It's an Ibis, it's a Ripley, it's an aluminum Ripley, and it's a little heavier than your normal Ripley, but the meat and potatoes are there. The suspension performance is there, the geometry is there, and that's really what makes a bike climb super well. Sure, the extra weight, you're gonna feel that over a really long ride or over, you know, if you wanted to marathon XC race this bike, which probably wouldn't recommend anyway, you'll feel that extra weight. My build came in probably right around 32 pounds in a size extra large, so it's not ultra light, but it's not as heavy as some other alloy bikes we're seeing. But like I said, the important stuff is there. Suspension performance and the geometry. It still has that Ibis really supple off the top suspension feel, where there's a ton of traction, there's a ton of control, that rear end's not bouncing around on the climbs, without it feeling overly squishy or pedal bobby or inefficient. I don't know what magic sauce Ibis puts in their bikes, but whatever it is, it's really good. You know, they won't give us the recipe. So the Ripley AF is probably about 85 to 90% as good as its carbon sibling on the climbs. You know, it's a little heavier, little slacker, which makes it a little bit longer, which can hurt a little bit in the technical bits. It's a little harder to navigate, and it just doesn't quite have that tiny bit of edge that the carbon Ripley has. So I give it an A-, and it's 90% as good as the carbon one. Let's jump into the downhill really quick. This is where that 10% penalty pays off in spades on the downhill. You get a 10% penalty on the uphill for a 15 to 20% bonus on the downhill. That degree slacker head tube and subsequent longer wheelbase totally change how this bike rides. It's super stable, super planted. It just takes the Ripley and makes it the hard charging descender that I want it to be, at least. I think it's also a combination of the geometry changes with the aluminum frame. There's something about how an aluminum frame rides, especially where I rode in the desert. You know, it's very chattery, chunky, and rocky, and the aluminum frame seems to smooth that out just a little bit better than a carbon frame. The way I like to describe it is the alloy frame rides quiet. You know, it has nothing to do with your ears. It's how it feels. It has kind of this quiet, smooth, controlled feeling underneath you. Even though it's heavier, even though it has an aluminum frame that's supposedly dead, it doesn't ride that way. You know, it still has that lively, engaging, fun character that the Ripley's known for. So you get all of that goodness combined with the degree slacker head tube angle goodness, and you've got a really, really good descending trail bike. One thing I noticed, I haven't seen kinematic charts on this, but just guessing, I'd say there's either a bigger spacer or the suspension is more progressive than the carbon Ripley. I feel like you can charge a little bit harder without blowing through all the travel quite as easily. It feels like there's a little bit more, that it's a little bit deeper. On the downhill, I'd say the Ripley AF gets an A-. It more than hangs with the other 120 mil travel trail bikes, and it's a good 15 to 20% better at descending than the carbon Ripley. So lastly, who is this bike for? Maybe I'll start this off with who it's not for. Terrible grammar. It is not for the XC racer. It's not for someone who wants to just sprint uphill until you're like snotty and drooling and really unpleasant and really, I don't know who would want to do that anyway, but it's not for those kinds of folks. It's for the person who likes short travel bikes for the way they descend, if that makes any sense at all. There is this certain quality to how a short travel bike descends. You know, it's easier to jump, it's easier to maneuver, it's a little more fun to ride. It requires you to bring your A game, it requires you to be a pilot rather than a passenger. So the Ripley AF is for the person who appreciates that about a bike, but it still is pretty capable. You know, it's not long travel, it's not Ripmo capable, but it's still very, very capable for a short travel trail bike. And bonus, it's $3,000. We are super excited about this bike. If it's anything like the Ripmo AF, it's probably going to be a little tough to come by. We have orders placed, tons of bikes coming in as we speak, so call into the shop if you want to get your hands on one. Let us know. We're stoked to help you out. Thanks for sticking around this long, and we'll see you next time.